Welcome to LYLAS. If you grew up in the 90s and you know what LYLAS stands for, then this podcast is for you. And today we have another heavy topic. If you've been listening the last couple of weeks, we're basically a country song at this point. We've hit up addiction. we've hit up, we've talked about trauma. And today we're going to delve into the big D, which stands for divorce. And so we are by no means advocating for divorce, but if you find yourself in this situation, you might need some support. So that's what we hope to offer you today.
I love the country music reference. Like, that is the funniest thing, and it's so true. But I guess more that we accept our lives as kind of being like art, it just works out a little bit more, doesn't it? That's why we relate and listen to things.
Well, when we sat down and just threw out a couple of topics, we were like, okay, what do we actually have personal experience with? And this is one of those topics that kept rising up because you have personal experience as having had a divorce, and we both are children of divorce, both, our biological parents divorced. So we have some experience in that area and hope to share some of that insight today in a good old fashioned therapy session here.
That's right. And here we go, right?
Right. I think I was just telling you this. I have a couple of friends that have gone through divorce or in the process. You certainly were there, or, if not so long ago. I feel like I can actually pretty vividly remember we had reconnected. You were still married at the time, but I would say that we definitely started to reconnect a lot as you were going through your separation. Would you agree with that? Is my memory serving me correctly?
No, I do think so. And I think it even started maybe even a few years before that.
Yes.
And I think that was part of like the dying process that was happening. You know what I mean? And whenever I think you're in that zone and space with things, you're not even 100% aware that that's what's happening, but it also is. And so whenever you started to see me like come down to see you and I was always by myself, or, I was starting to go off and do things and I was always by myself, there was never a talk, I don't think, at that point, like, hey, we're having problems, we're going to get a divorce. But it was just very apparent that there was a separation, even if it wasn't formal, that was forming within the context of the relationship, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely started to notice once you started traveling, and you were really into long distance running at that time, and you all would do it together. And I would see your posts on social media and you were smiling together, but you weren't together. Like, a lot of it was individual, and it was like you were doing the same races and things like that. So again, let's kind of let's back up a little bit so our listeners have an idea of how it started. Again, we are not here to advocate, that you should get a divorce. I truly believe that marriage is work and that you should work on it and give it everything you have. But I also believe that you shouldn't stay together for your kids. I know some people throw that out sometimes. I don't think that's appropriate. I think that everyone deserves to be happy. And if you have tried and you are not happy, that it is okay to accept that perhaps, there's something else out there for you.
100%.
And so take us back to the beginning of
to high school.
And well, yeah, I mean, it did kind of start in high school, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess going back to the stereotypical West Virginia country music song kind of a thing. My ex-husband was 2 years older than me, and we dated whenever we were in high school. So I think we started dating whenever I was a junior. And for whatever, I think that I've just had this, I don't know if it's a rebellious kind of personality or it's just been kind of like, screw the world, screw you, screw anybody if they have a problem kind of thing. And not necessarily to a detriment, but also clearly not making some of the best decisions. I have this regrettable tattoo on my stomach that I just thought was a great idea at 16. Also turned out not to be.
Let's paint that picture real quick, because our listeners have not seen the epic tattoo that you got at 16. And I'll never forget that moment when you came to school and you were like, look what I did. And I was like, Sarah, that's going to be the biggest cat you've ever seen someday when you're pregnant. So let's just paint that picture. It was, if I remember correctly, a leopard across
Mm-hmm.
the top of your belly button. So the entire top of your stomach has a leopard on it. And the bottom underneath your belly button is like sun rays coming out. Is that correct?
It's ridiculous. Yes. But the sun, unfortunately, goes all the way around the leopard as well.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Right.
So yes.
It's
So when
worse.
she,
It's worse.
when she's saying regrettable actions, now you really have an idea of she is the epitome of go big or go home.
Mm-hmm. Still haven't learned that lesson yet. Maybe I don't need to, as things seem to be somewhat fine. But yeah, so that was one of them. But we actually got engaged while I was still in high school. Again, probably not the brightest idea. But I think that my parents kind of had this rearing style that you need to learn to live with the consequences of your decisions. Whatever those consequences are, we're not saving your ass for it. So it was a very much a live and learn. It was very much kind of like a the world is open to you, but the biggest pieces of this again are learning that you're on your own through it. We'll sit there and maybe offer you some advice, but clearly we're not directing the ship in any way, shape, or form. And so go for it and then deal with it. So, but that's not to say they've not been supportive, but I think it helped to frame some of my decision making over the years. You know what I mean? Yeah, as well as
Yeah.
my independence, which I'm very thankful for because I do think that that was very beneficial in many, many ways. So we got engaged and ended up getting married 3 weeks after we graduated high school, almost to the day. You and our good friend Lynn, who we talk about on here, had to come back from senior week, maybe a
Straight
day or
from
two
senior week.
early.
I did have the best tan in those wedding photos, though, I must say. That was a good one.
Yeah. So, I mean, we did get married at a young age. He had a fine job. He did not go straight into college. I did as soon as I graduated from high school. And we were married for 16 years. So, again, it wasn't like one of those situations where you just have the kid and then, you realize things are shit. It really took a long time before it was just to the point where, again, the dying process happened. And then whenever the day kind of finally occurred, it was like, this is just dead on arrival. Like, this is just, there's no other path, course, or anything for us to do. This is just it.
It was like a
So,
slow unraveling, but then like a very obvious end from
mhm,
at least my perception, because you all were so supportive of each other. When you were getting your degrees, he was working, and then he went back to school, you were working. And so you all were sort of, and you were raising this incredible son at the same time.
mhm,
You had a lot on your plate. I think that's fair to say. Both of you
mhm,
had a lot on your plate for many of those years. And
mhm.
then kind of once all of that came to fruition, it was you looked at each other one day and you were like, I don't even know you. I
Yeah.
mean, at least again, my perception as your friend.
No, that's totally fair. I think that we were very good at being teammates and
Yes.
supportive to a degree, I would say, with each other and what our own personal ventures and outlets were. I think that we both took a very different role in the way that we engage with our son. Um, he would always be at the golf courses or kind of doing different things like that with him, and that just obviously we've talked about this. It's not necessarily my cup of tea. I like it a lot more now, but it just wasn't something um, that worked well at that point. But I would do other things with Cameron. And
Yeah.
so we each played a very different role within his life, but I think that that helped to make him very well rounded. And I think that it helped him to get to have individual relationships with each of
Mhm.
his parents as well as his grandparents because we were so open to him being a part of everyone's life. Like we never sheltered him as just being like, he's ours or, he's mine, this, that, or the other. And so I think that that really helped him to have a greater collective group of people and made him be very well rounded throughout his childhood and even, into today. So. That
Well, and you
was
guys were still going on vacations. You were doing a lot of family
mhm,
activities. Like I said, you all were putting in the work on some level as far as like still continuing to do activities and do things, but relationships dissolve all the time, not just marriages, friendships,
right.
all types of relationships dissolve if you don't continue to listen to your partner and put
Mhm.
in the work.
Right. And I think that, rightly or wrongly, perception is formed by what you see and not what you know. Right.
Hmm.
And so, social media, I think, did a great job. Or I did. I mean, I was the one posting about this shit. Let's be for real. Um, that it had this illusion that things were like okay and joined. And in actuality, they were not. And it
Yeah.
wasn't like there was like this intention of like painting a picture that wasn't true. It was just the picture that was true at that point in time, just for specific things. But even if you were to like go back and do like again, I'm using like a death kind of a thing, but like an autopsy of it, um, maybe at some big events we were together, but not during the majority of them.
Hmm.
Not even during like different training times or, you know, again, what was what was seen, but that was not the true reality, I don't think, of the situation.
Yeah, and I think when people post things on social media, they're not doing it to be deceptive in any way
Mm-mm.
or to paint this like false picture, but most people aren't going on social media to air their dirty laundry or
Right.
to say my husband and I had a huge fight last night or we're really struggling right now. Most people aren't doing that. And so I don't think that in any way it's a deception to go on and show the best parts of your life.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it serves as a reminder to all of us that doom scroll, as my husband calls it, that you're only seeing the best parts of people's
Mm-hmm.
lives and that you truly never know what's going on behind closed doors.
That's fair. And I do think that that idea of things does make it more isolating, especially if you're a woman and you find yourself in this type of relationship or place in your life, and then you see what's happening all around you. You do feel like you are the only person kind of going through it. Even if you know other people have had a divorce or have, gone through things, again, it's what you see forms your perception. And
Mm-hmm.
so, it was just, I think that I was the first, maybe the first one of our friend groups to get a divorce,
Mm-hmm.
and that was just like a foreign kind of a thing. And I think, again, we had been together for 16 years, and that's a pretty
Which
long time.
I was going to say, there's something to celebrate in that. The fact that you all married so young,
Hmm.
both of you still managed to finish college. You ended up a doctor of psychology
Hmm.
and and you raised this amazing child through all of that and managed to keep a marriage together for 16 years. I don't know a lot of people that started out as young as you all were that lasted as long as you all did. So I think there's
Hmm.
something to be said for the fact that you didn't just immediately walk away or throw in the towel, that it was a process
Yeah.
over time. And that but I guess my question for you is, when did you know it was over? When did you know it was like the time to take the next step?
Um, hmm. I mean, I think that it happened sometime in the summer of like 2016. And I mentioned this, I think, on one of our other, maybe episode 4 of the podcast. Um, I was teaching a group at work, and I was talking about role modeling relationships and how
Mm-hmm.
important that is for your kids to see healthy relationships, because that forms their context of what one should look like for them.
Yeah.
And as soon as I said that, I basically was like, uh-oh. And I am not a person, eh, it's not within me to to go ahead and continue living that. Like, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
not living genuinely by what I know, then I'm just not able to do things. And so it was at that point I was like, well, this is not, this needs to end. This is not okay.
Yeah.
We never fought, and I think that that's, every relationship has its own um issues that kind of present within it.
Sure.
And there was never a time in which we fought with each other. We very rarely, and I'm sure there were incidents, had harsh words or disagreements about things, but it was not like he was being raised in like a conflict-ridden home. What
Right.
he was being raised in was with two people who were friends and not two people who were, um, engaged in a marital relationship. And that to me was striking because again, I didn't want his idea of a marriage to be like this because
Yeah.
I was clearly very unhappy. And I think what I thought was going to happen is that I'm going to stick this out until he graduates, right? Because he was like 11 or 12 at the time. And I think that's again another notion that people have. I'm just going to stick this out until, they go off to school and then, we'll figure things out and go our own separate ways. But I realized that again, I am putting him then in a position where he's going to have 6 more years of modeling this.
Yeah.
And that's not okay. I am not going to put my son in a position where that is what I'm doing to him.
Mm.
And so, I guess my grand plan was once he turned 18 and went to college, I was going to go to like off to Europe and just live there. I think I'd even started to look at applying at like the American University and like all different kinds of things that would help to support that kind of goal. Um, and that probably wasn't fair of me either. You know what I mean? To be
Mhm.
sitting there planning a different section of my life, knowing that it
Yeah.
was going to be, without that other person there. And
Yeah.
so I just was like, I'm just done. And so we did not go down a marriage counseling kind of route. Again, it wasn't, I don't think, apparent to, and I'm not going to speak for him, but it wasn't apparent to me that there was a reason for it.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes things just run their course, and that if you continue to try to run past that limit, it runs it into the ground, and then it isn't okay. And so that was it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times when we think of divorce, we think of like typically maybe there was infidelity or
Mhm.
maybe, maybe there's like some sort of abuse happening there and somebody finally kind of breaks away from that. And so, like, for you to just kind of wake up one day and recognize it's just, I'm friends with him, but like we're not in love. I think if you still genuinely love the person, or maybe you've just come to like a roadblock in your relationship, maybe that's an appropriate time to seek counseling.
Sure.
There's still love there, you still want to make the marriage work. I think that that's important to always explore the option
Mhm.
of marriage counseling, but also I think it's important, if you're certainly being hurt in any way, emotionally, physically, that that's okay to walk away or at least separate and say
Mhm.
that that's not okay. It's not
Mhm.
okay to hurt me.
Right.
And not saying that he did, but I'm just saying that
Mm-mm.
if you are somebody that finds yourself in that type of relationship, walking away from that is certainly okay. No one deserves to be treated poorly.
No, and and that is true. And I think that, again, we never really fought, and we had a lot of distance.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly we're living in many ways almost two different lives with
Mm-hmm.
the child kind of being at the center of it. But for us to have considered, for me to have considered going to marriage counseling, there still needed to be some emotion there, and there just wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think that people can recognize these things about themselves or their relationships. And again, it was not happy. It was fine, but I was not living in my best self. I mean, I was probably in the best shape I've ever been in my life, but that's because honestly, I don't think that I wanted to be around him or at home. And
Mm-hmm.
so I found other ways to kind of compensate for that,
Yeah.
which again was at no fault to him. I mean, he was always supportive of me doing that kind of a thing. Or, our kid was always, being taken care of. Like he, again, had this immense support system of people that he always wanted to kind of explore what they were doing because that helped him with his own personal depth. But um, it was just something that I just knew that it's not fair for me to even put somebody in a position whenever I know that I'm not going to be a player in it. And I
Yeah.
think that that's important with marriage counseling too, is that some people want to try to use that as like, a last just effort, like especially the other person, if they're caught off or surprised by it, this, that, or the other. But if you're just not into doing it, don't further hurt that other person by
Yeah.
thinking that this is going to be a saving chance. And that was something for me. I don't even know that we talked about it. I was just like, there's just no point in this. Like, you know, it's finished.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. It was finished.
Yeah.
But for other people, those things work and it can be very helpful. Um, and so again, I'm not being disparaging on that. I just knew that for me, that was not my path.
Yeah. I've had friends that have separated due to infidelity and
Hmm.
sought counseling and worked through it and kept their family together perfectly happy. I mean, I definitely think that it works for some people,
Hmm.
especially like you said, if you've got two people willing to go and to put in the effort. I mean, there's clearly like an emotional tie still there that you want to
Hmm.
work through something. But certainly in your case, in my parents' case, like they're, you know, my dad had fallen in love with another woman. And so there was, again, he was not emotionally tied at the time. I think
Hmm.
my parents at different points during their divorce maybe wanted reconciliation. I think maybe
Hmm.
mom did at the very beginning. I think my dad did a later time. I know he certainly had a lot of regrets throughout the rest of his life
Mm.
or the decisions that he had made. But again, I think that you've got to have two people willing at the same time to want to work for that to work. That's just
Hmm.
my opinion based off of, my
Yeah.
experiences. But I'm curious because, Cam is an only child. He
Hmm.
was 12 years old at the time, and he's always been very emotionally mature. Like I said, I mean, I can't sing his praises enough. I really think so highly of him. But how did you all approach that with him as a 12-year-old? Did you all immediately come clean? How did you go about that?
Um, well, I think that, I think we both recognize the importance of him in that whole entire process. And if we could probably go back and do it over again, we would have done it with greater skill. Again, it wasn't
Mm,
like that there was any fighting or, he wasn't exposed to anything necessarily negative. But I think that just like your perception of our relationship, that was
mhm.
also his to a
Yeah,
degree because he didn't have the stereotypical, again, my parents are always fighting. I wish they would stop or whatever else.
yeah,
And so he was living under the perception that things were okay, even though we had not been sleeping in the same room for years, probably like 5 or 6, maybe even 7 years,
wow,
a long time. Um, he still just saw that he had two parents who seemed to get along pretty well, who were both independent and could do their own things, but there was never anything that he was exposed to that would give him a clue as
yeah,
to what was going on. And maybe it wasn't even appropriate for him. Again, he's 12 years old. He's, you know what I mean, kind of coming
yeah,
into his own space. But I think that made that process more shocking for him whenever it actually started to occur.
hmm,
And I think that he probably, and I'm speaking for him in this, but he probably would have liked to have seen some other type of effort or, us going to marriage counseling or figuring something else out other than just a heartbreak and separation.
yeah,
And so also what Cameron saw, and I'm actually proud of this because I hope that this also, sits with some women, because I think, we've talked about mom guilt,
mm,
like that
hmm,
you are that person who has to just kind of suck it up and do everything for your kid and put yourself aside for it or whatever else. But I was the one that left.
mm,
And so Cameron literally saw me driving off
hmm,
and he stayed at the house with his dad, knowing that at that point in time, I didn't even have a place to go. I had actually started like the whole process of thinking about where I wanted to go and live and so forth, but I didn't have anything.
yeah,
And so for him to watch me drive away, also knowing that, I
hmm,
think was probably pretty difficult within that moment. But I think that Cameron has always uh, seen me as being independent, or
Mhm.
I'll figure this shit out. You know what I mean? Kind of a,
Mhm.
I mean, it may not always be pretty, but I always get to the end goal. Um, and I think that, he was a part of the apartment getting kind of processed. So he helped to kind
Mhm.
of look for things, and, to decorate. So he was included in all of that. But I say that because I think that many people would probably stay. And then, you know what I mean? Or there'd be some disagreement about the house or how things were going to go. And I was just like, no, like,
Right.
I'll leave. I'll make this easy. This is me wanting this. This is me verbalizing it. This is me saying that this is it. And it's then not fair for me to say, you need to leave.
Right.
You know, I mean, we
Mhm.
bought that house at like, I don't know, like 20, so we did everything young. I mean,
Yeah.
we were able to do big things at those kind of points, but it still just was not um, okay. And so,
Mm.
again, I'm the one that leaves. He's seeing me go, bye, everything's going to be okay.
I was gonna say, did you actually say to him like, "This is what's happening. Your dad and I are
Hmm.
divorcing. I'm gonna be getting a new home. You're still gonna come to my house and his house, and we're
Yeah.
still
I,
going to
I,
see each other."
yeah, I think that conversation, the day that I left, it was not done that gracefully.
Mm.
It just wasn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that my ex-husband was more shocked by the fact that I was just like, no, in a way, because I think
Mhm.
that he also still, um, again, lived under a different kind of idea, knowing that things were not good, knowing that I had said previous things about it, but just, we all live in that kind of space. Well, it's not going to mean it, or it's just going to be one more time
Yeah.
kind of a thing. And I was like, no, I've been
When
doing
you
this probably for like 5, 6, 7 years again. And at this point, I'm a type 1 diabetic. Homegirl's not going to live forever.
That's
Why am
not
I
true.
doing this? Why am I
Don't
doing
put
this?
limits on yourself now.
Right, right. But I was just like, no, and I can't sit here and practice or preach what I'm talking about, you know what I mean, to a group of patients or other people's lives who I'm trying to help improve if I'm living a lie myself. And so, again, I say all that just because I think so many women just end up staying, or that there's some type of, fight or fussle or something that kind of takes place. And for me, it was just, I need to remove myself from the situation. And I think that the day that it happened was the day that Cameron was there, and he, um, saw me leave and saw his dad upset, which is normative and should be. But it was probably not as graceful as it could have been. Let's put
Mhm.
it that way. And so that's something that I have to be reflective of, and was, especially during that kind of period of time, and that I needed to make sure that he still saw me as being nurturing and supportive, and understanding that this was a difficult process, and that no one was being kind of abandoned,
Right.
um, through any of this, to a degree, including, his dad, that he was still going to be a part of decision making, that we were still going to kind of do X, Y, and Z. And, whenever we were talking about this prior to, coming on here, it all comes down to me to like role modeling relationships.
Mhm.
And so it's really important to me that I'm role modeling the kind of relationship that I want my kids to have.
Yeah.
And I knew that I wasn't doing it then, but then I look back at what my parents did, and my parents were divorced just the same as yours. And I was like, these people made everything look easy,
Mm.
like everything.
I don't know. Speak for yourself on that one.
Oh my God,
Your people might have made it look easy.
oh, I was clearly living in a delusional space, and still to some degree am. But they just did. And I don't
Yeah.
even, I mean, I say all the time, kind of jokingly, I must have been raised by wolves or like hippies or some shit, because it just, like, the things that they let me do, or the way that they kind of, no one does this. And I just had that as my context that I was then
Mhm.
living off of. You know what I mean? Like, well, they get along great. Everything works out really well with them. Or that again is my perception of what happens, just
Right.
because, it's what you see. Um, but I mean, I have a lot of years to prove that that's also still a fact. And I think that that served as my base for how this whole process was going to go. And that is also not fair because everybody's experience with an event, whether it's a traumatic event, a divorce, a job transition, any a diagnosis, anything is based upon their experience of reality,
Yeah.
which is not a global thing. And so for me to think that my divorce or situation was going to be a mirror of what my parents did was not fair.
Yeah.
And that's something still that I think because Cameron grew up seeing my mom and my dad be great friends, like always coming to the birthdays, always, being at like even Christmases at random times or whatever, even though they both were remarried and have these other people within their lives, he always still saw them as kind of being together, or being able to be together in the same space and good friends and their new significant others. My step parents all got along wonderfully. And I think that that was probably it was a beautiful thing to him to see, but that's not necessarily the reality that we live in now. And I think that that's hard.
Yeah. I was just curious because my experience was so different. Like I was so young when my kid or my parents divorced. I was 5, I think, when my dad left. And, I remember people telling me all the time, they wouldn't tell me anything. They would just say, "You're too young to understand. We'll explain it to
Mhm,
you someday." And I remember having a lot of big feelings like my dad's gone. It's just my mom. She cries a lot. You
mm,
there was a lot looking back, there was a lot of uncertainty. And I'm certain it was incredibly difficult for her at that time to not say terrible things about him. He had just walked out on his family for a woman 10 years younger, and he
mhm,
ended up marrying her. And so the fact that my mom was able to always, I mean, she wasn't going around painting him in like this wonderful light, but she wasn't
mhm,
talking badly about him to us either. And I
mhm,
think now looking back, that must have been so incredibly hard. I mean, I
mm,
don't know that I would be able to do that, quite frankly. Um, but I just remember that a lot of people just saying, well, we'll explain it to you when you're older. And even though I was so young, like if someone would have just sat me down and told me the basics, like your dad's going to have a house, we're going to have a house, you're going to go back and forth. I think about these
mhm,
kids that go back, back and forth throughout the school week. They spend 3 days on, 3 days off. I would not have thrived in that environment. I mean,
mm,
mostly because my dad lived 30 minutes away. On a good day, it was, 30 minutes away. Um, but like the constant back and forth, that to me is very difficult. But
mhm,
I think had someone at least just explained to me what's going to change in our lives versus like just kind of rolling with it and figuring it out, that might
mhm.
have helped me as a young child. Again, this was in the 80s. There wasn't Google. Mom couldn't get online and Google how to help my kids with divorce.
Right.
She was a single mom, you know, she immediately went back or got a job working full time. And so, like, there were so many other things that she was dealing with. She certainly, I mean, I have no resentment or anything as far as like how it was handled, but I do think looking back, it would have been helpful to know, okay, this is how our life's about to change.
Mhm,
Here's what's going to stay the same. You're still
mhm.
loved, you're still cared for, we're still a family. We will get through, we will get through this, but just the fact that everyone just assumed that I was too young to know anything,
Sure.
I think was hurtful or maybe harder, made the process harder in some ways.
Oh, I totally agree. And that was one thing that I think that looking back at how my mom and dad told me that they were getting divorced, that's what they did that was brilliant that I probably should have taken a play out of that playbook from because that's certainly not what um, happened in my situation. They sat us down and basically just were like, hey, we still really care for each other, but we just need to not be together.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be getting, what's called a divorce, which means we're not going to be married anymore. You know, um, I'm going to, mom was like, I'm going to live here. Your dad's going to live someplace else. You're still going to see him. You're still going to be able to talk to him. And he was like, yeah, everything's going to be fine. We're going to be able to, um, still support you. We both still love you very much. And I think that my first question to them was, um, what are we going to do about vacations? Oh, I mean,
Of
this is
course,
coming
that was
off
your first
right.
question, knowing
At
you
8.
at 8.
At
It's
at
hilarious.
8. This travel bug was, I guess, born within me. And they looked at each other and they said, "Well, you're gonna go on one with your mom and one with me." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Hell yes." I
You
was
get 2
like,
vacations a year?
right. And so then I
Sold.
sta right, this is where my 8-year-old mind went. I was like, "Okay, well, they both say they're gonna be okay, and I get 2 of everything now. This is fabulous."
Mhm.
But they did, and that's what it always was. Like, I would have one Christmas with my dad and have one Christmas with my mom, and it was like, I felt like
Yeah,
I won the lottery, you know? And they were great at doing that throughout my life. And I think that, and this is, probably again, if you can go back and maybe, I don't know that I would ever change anything. There's one, I mean, I
sure.
definitely changed the tattoo. Okay. That's the one thing if I come back in my life and say, no.
Oh.
But I don't even know that I would change Cameron's experience of him finding out that we were getting a divorce in that day, because I do think that that builds a level of character. I don't think that he was, traumatized or anything for it, but I think that it could have been done with greater skill. But I think
Yeah.
that what he was able to see in the aftermath is truly what a happy relationship can look like. And
Mhm.
that's where, whenever you start to kind of like go through that whole divorce process, moving out kind of process. And I lived, honestly, I think it was like 30 minutes away from where the house that he grew up in, because I had to move way down the road, just for work and other reasons. Um, but I think that, I was always open and honest and supportive with him. He had a consistent schedule, because he's rudimented. You know how I am. We're scheduled people, and so Cameron would spend usually Sunday through Thursday morning with me, and then he would be at his dad's house on the weekends. So from Thursday night until Sunday or whatever. And that stayed our
Mhm.
schedule. That was our consistent schedule. That's still, the kid is 19. If he he has freedom to do whatever he wants. He's able to make his own independent decisions, and he still sticks to that schedule just because
That's so
that's him.
funny.
I know he's so silly. Um, but it works. And I think that I was always, had to be that, you have to be that base for your kid where they can see
Mhm.
that you're also okay, or that you are thriving. Or if there are points of things that might be a struggle, then you talk about problem solving them or working towards a solution instead of just dwelling on something being hard or challenging. And, it's always for me about, I don't think of myself as raising kids, except I'm coaching miniature adults. And
Mhm.
so it's a different frame of mind. But I think through that, he was able to, kind of gain some understanding as to why things didn't kind of work. And then
Mhm.
as I started to kind of go through that whole dating process, I think that some of those things were kind of awkward for him,
Sure.
because he did have a very close and different relationship with his dad. But there is nothing that I would change about any element of the situation. Like, it is
Yeah.
amazing how well things have turned out.
Well, one thing you all, or I observed you doing, because I can remember coming to your apartment after you
Mhm.
separated and you got your apartment and Cam was there. And I came up and spent many hours into the wee hours of the morning and we just sat and talked. But I got to observe you really holding space for him to feel his feelings, because a lot of big feelings come with
Mhm.
the divorce or any kind of major life transition, any kind of trauma. And divorce definitely can be trauma for children. But you gave him space to feel those feelings. He cried that night
Mhm.
and it was okay. And you just let him know that that was okay. And that's something that we do for our friends when they're grieving. That's something we do. You just are there to hold space and let them feel that emotion, because that's okay to feel the way that you feel. You don't want
Mhm.
to feel that and be like, don't be sad, don't cry, it's going to be fine. In that moment, it's not fine. And
Right.
it's okay to let that out in an appropriate way. You'd much
Mhm.
rather them sit there and cry for an hour than to, turn to something different or, have anger issues or aggression, but just to sit with them and give them that space to feel those big feelings, I think was something that you did really well
Mm.
going through your divorce, at least again, from my
Mhm.
perception and what I observed being around you all during that time.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. That's nice. But yeah, it was just they weren't invalid feelings. They were
No,
very valid. And for me to have challenged them just because I didn't like his dad or whatever else, you know what I mean? It wouldn't have been, that's not the play. You
right.
know, that's not what you need to do. And so, but again, he has so much emotional maturity and intelligence with him that and I think this is where you judge it based upon your kid. You know your kid, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? But you also got to be big in this too. And then you just gave him space, but gave him security too. So
Hmm.
even though he was feeling sad, I didn't want to just come out and say everything's going to be okay, but I wanted him to know that it was, and that you do that just by showing of actions, but that you do that by again, not necessarily disparaging the other kind of
No.
parent or anything else along those lines. And at times that can be very, very easy to want to go down those rabbit
Oh,
holes.
so
um
hard. I can't even imagine.
yeah, no, that's just, and I get it, you know what I mean. In different situations people feel different ways, fine. And I just don't know that that's what you should do whenever it comes to your kids. And so for him, it was just allowing him to feel a sense of strength, a sense of comfort, security in things. And, he was going through not just the divorce in a sense, but he had also, like a year or, well, almost a year earlier, had also got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And so
Hmm.
he was still trying to figure out like all of this stuff. And so that really, we've always been close. Like Cameron and I have a very unique relationship.
Hmm.
Um, and then whenever that happened to him, it was like, she's my example of what to do. And I need to have her with me all the time so that way I know what to do. And
Hmm.
so that added a different layer to it in some ways because then he was with someone else who was not like him.
Sure.
And even though, his father was very knowledgeable and equipped in it, it's not the same as having your security blanket. You know what I mean? Kind of
Or
there.
somebody that's living the same experience in some ways.
Yes. Yes. And I think that, um, that has been something, again, I would never take away, and this sounds weird, but I would never wish for either one of us to not be what we are
Hmm.
as even type 1 diabetics, because I think it's a superpower for us. And I think that it has helped us both in numerous ways and motivated us in different areas. And I think that it really helped even during that time because he still was able to have that kind of connection or knew that kind of support. And then whenever I started dating, and that's the next thing, it's like, when do you introduce somebody new? You don't want to put your life on hold. Like, how does this whole kind of process work? There's not a manual for this stuff.
Right. Right.
Again, I had been practiced, I don't know, for many years, and there's not a manual. You just have to really believe that your judgment is good and that you're going to act with integrity and not with emotion, and just, kind of do what the best thing is with having age appropriate conversations, but also not necessarily putting stuff on hold. So, we had a gradual introduction as part of our relationship, and so much of it was kind of um, not dictated by Cameron, but he had a role in moving the boundary line, you
Hmm.
know? And, like, so he would know that I would talk to my husband now on the phone, and he would say hi, or that they would talk a little bit, or he would, kind of go out to eat with us and things like that. But the day that the breakthrough kind of happened is we were going grocery shopping, and he said, "Can we invite Jeff over? I want to fix dinner."
Mm.
And this kid has cooked, I mean, forever. And I was like, I mean, I was like, oh my God, yes. Well, you know what I mean? I wanted to like start jumping up and down and screaming as I was going through the
Sure.
grocery store, like, yay. But I had to keep that kind of, muted. And I was like, okay. I was like, can you tell me a little bit more about your decision in doing this? Because I wanted to make sure that he wasn't doing it for me, that this was actually like an organic feeling that he had within himself. And he was like, I just think it would be a nice kind of thing to do. And I want to do this. And I was like, okay, well, that means I'm going to call him. Is you still cool? Because I'm about to pick up the phone, yo. And he was like, yes. And he was like, do you know what he likes to eat? And I was like, I'm sure that whatever you make will be fine. And so we did. And they had that first dinner. And, that went really well. And then it just kind of continued to blossom and bloom from that. And I think it's because my husband is very relatable. He's a very honest and true and charming and interesting human, but he came with something that was unique to both of us in that my husband's family was just full of type 1 diabetics. Like his dad was a type 1 diabetic, his uncle was a type 1 diabetic. So for us, it's almost like whenever we meet someone new, we also have to not introduce them just to Sarah, but also to Sarah and her diabetes. You know what I mean? And whenever I was dating, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm wearing an insulin pump. Like, how's this going to, go down whenever we start to
Right.
get frisky? Is this guy going to be like, is this guy going to be cool with this thing at this point in time?
Uh,
But whenever he told me, he was like, yeah, I know about type 1 diabetes. My first thought was like, bullshit. Like, you're just trying to impress me, right? And he was like, no,
yeah.
my dad's a type 1 diabetic. My uncle's a type 1 diabetic. My first cousin is. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, God put you here specifically for this. Like, there's no one better that you ever could have pulled out of the earth than somebody who understands what these things are. And whenever Cameron heard that too, I think that that automatically was another connection to something. And I think that that really, really, really was very oddly beneficial in that whole process. And so,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that, and that gives a lot of hope to anybody that's going through a separation or a divorce. That while it is, I think, from what I've observed, again, from other people or people that I love that have gone through this process, it's one of the toughest things you'll ever go through. It's a death in many ways. It, you go through the grief process of what was, what you thought might be, what you thought your life was going to look like. But on the other side of that is something even more beautiful than you could have ever imagined
Mm-hmm.
if you take the time to really process and take care of yourself through the divorce process. Because I always say, I mean, like everybody who's a child of divorce, you always wonder what your life would have been like if your parents had stayed married.
Mm.
I look at my husband's parents and where he's from, it seems like everyone stayed married. I remember going there and I'm like, what is in the water? You all don't age. Everyone is still married. What the hell is happening in the Midwest?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whereas where we came from, I would say the majority of my friends' parents were divorced and on their second marriage. So
Mm-hmm.
it was just so different from what I had known. And of course, I've always wondered what would have happened, but so many beautiful things came out of my parents' divorce.
Oh,
We
yeah.
had a whole new life. My mom remarried several years later. He gave us so many opportunities in life that I would have never had. He introduced me to so many things that I would have probably never known
Mm.
about or really had, taken an interest in. And then I got to watch my dad live his dreams. He bought a farm. He literally built it from the ground up. He ran a successful business with his wife at the time, who had a very solid business mind, and he really needed that partner in order to
Mm-hmm.
have a thriving business. Because the business aspect of it, he was great at the work and securing the work and doing the work, but the whole business side of things was not his forte.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I got to see him really live for many years this really beautiful life that he had always dreamed of. And my mom is a city girl. She's, we often, I mean, I make fun of her all the time. Like, you're such a city slicker because she is. She would have never lasted on that farm over in Pliny, West Virginia.
Right.
But so I did get to see both of my parents, and my mom, had a supportive spouse who loved her and cherished her
Mm-hmm.
and treated her well. So I got to see that and see that life goes on and that that there is some really beautiful things on the other side of the yucks, as we like to say.
Oh, yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think that, again, when I look back on my parents' divorce and then their remarriages, there is, and I hope they don't, if they listen to this, don't take this the wrong way. There is absolutely no way in hell that I would want the two of them to, A, still be married, or to even like, if some awful thing were to happen, or even like get remarried, because they are just, I don't know how they made it work for whenever they did. They're two separate and very different people. And I know they have common threads and this, that, and the other, but I got so much out of their divorce that it was a great gift that they gave to me. It was
Mm-hmm.
wonderful. And I know that that sounds weird to kind of come back and say, but that was the context I was living off of. And I think even now, and seeing how things have changed within our lives, I do believe that that was the greatest thing that I could have done for Cameron. There is no, I never have any doubt about making that decision and where I'm at now, because I do believe that was the best thing that I ever could have done for him. And
Which
there's no one that can convince me of that otherwise.
That's so great because I imagine if you're a mom and you're currently going through divorce, that you probably have a lot of guilt and that you're wondering
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things. Is this the right move for our family? Is this going to lead to trauma for my kids? Because it certainly can if it's not handled well. I mean, again, it's their perception of what happens and how it's handled, but um, to just know that it isn't, going to
Mm-hmm.
ruin them. It's not going to set them up for failure. It can be a blessing in disguise, as odd as that sounds.
Yeah.
That it really, some really beautiful, wonderful things can come from that. So that
Mm-hmm.
you do find yourself in that situation, just remind yourself, give yourself that grace in knowing that you were led to that decision for a reason and you have the tools to work through it and to support your kids. You've got to
Mm-hmm.
lean on your people, lean on your friends, lean on your family, and that you will get through it, that it's hard. But if you stick to it and get to the other side, there's real opportunities and more life experience for you. It's going to shape you
Definitely.
for sure. It's going to shape your children for
Mm-hmm.
sure. But look at all of the wonderful things that can come from that. I think that that's hopefully the message that we're getting across today, that it's a hard thing. I am not, I don't want, again, to by any means, um, you know, say that, yay, divorce is like great and that it's
Right.
wonderful and look at how great we all turned out. But people end up in divorce. I mean, what, 50% of marriages? I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if that statistic still rings true, but it happens and that you're going to be okay. I think the
Mm-hmm.
biggest takeaways, if you're worried about your kids and how they're going to process it, be honest with them. Tell them exactly what's about to change in their life and stick to the facts. You're going to have two homes. You're going to go
Mm-hmm.
to your dad's house for Christmas. Maybe you're going to be in that kind of relationship where you all can still spend holidays together. Let them know that. Make a plan for that. If
Mm-hmm.
you're in the space with your significant other that or your spouse, that you can do that, but let them know exactly what's about to change, what's not going to change, what's going to stay exactly the same. You're going to have two loving parents.
Yeah.
We're always going to be family because you're joined
Mm-hmm.
by, by your children forever,
Mm-hmm.
and that mom and dad are always going to be here for you. That's never going to change. And in their own ways,
Mm-hmm.
uh, in their own ways, mom and dad are going to be here for you. So I think that's huge, is to always remind them of that, and that it's okay to feel the big feelings, to give them space to grieve, to get angry, to cry, all the feelings that come out, and not, and if it's more than you feel like they can handle or it's really starting to have an impact, then maybe you do reach out and find some sort of counseling for them. Reach out to the school. A lot of guidance
Mm-hmm.
will do divorce groups. And so they'll be in like a small group at lunch with other kids in their age range that whose parents are also going through a divorce. And then they've got that peer that, oh, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only
Yeah.
kid whose parents are divorcing. There are other kids, and help them find their own sort of support network within a school system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Always reach out if you feel like they need more help.
Definitely. And you know your kid the best. And so that's where if there was ever any change within him that I saw or that was observable, or if anyone else ever noticed anything, then 100%, I had the best child psychologist in the world down the hall from me. And so we would have been able to have crossed that bridge or at even another points in time. But for him, I think it just came down to having those kind of conversations, giving him that type of space within it. I think at times it's still somewhat of a challenge. And I think I mentioned to you, the thing that that Cameron didn't see with my parents divorcing is that whenever he came around, that's whenever we started to kind of do like holidays and birthdays together. But that wasn't what I lived with as a reality as a child. You know what I
Right.
mean? That's why I was
Yeah.
like, hell yeah, I got 2 Christmases. Now we still do most of the time those types of events separate. But if these kids have done something that's pretty amazing, then we get together and have dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they're both there for it. But I think that that's what he thought was going to be like his experience of forever, and that's just not it. And so I'm bringing that up because, as people develop, age, and change, you do too, as do your
Mm-hmm.
relationships and what you feel is best for you to do. And so while he was in school, or again, considered a minor by all legal context, like his graduation parties or different things like that, like we would always invite and do things kind of together, um, or at least the invitation was open for it to.
Yeah.
But that invitation is not forever for us, and that is our decision. And um, again, I think that that's a conversation that you have then with your adult child. Because that changes their, I guess, kind of view of things again.
Or expectations,
Yeah,
maybe.
or their expectations of things. And again, we probably set this kid up for very interesting expectations because my parents were so different and good in some ways, and then in other ways maybe not. But and I think that you just have to give them that space then too,
Yeah.
And I don't think that, I mean, I'm just not the kind of person that whenever this kid turns like, I mean, at his wedding one day, will the other, yes, fine, great. But I do not need to have your 20th birthday
Right.
with my
Together.
ex-husband there.
Right.
No, ma'am.
And that's fair too. I mean,
He's
your boundaries.
20.
It still comes down to boundaries, and you have every right to have your own boundaries of what you feel like
Hmm.
serves you best. And if
Yeah.
that's not, if that doesn't serve you, those experiences or those circumstances, that's okay too. It's okay. You don't have to be negative about it or ugly
Mm-mm.
about it. You're just saying it's not for me. Celebrate with us on Thursday. Go see your dad on Saturday,
It's
and
perfect.
then you have two birthdays and two celebrations. And the bottom line is you're still giving that support, that care,
Hmm.
that love. And they get two separate birthday celebrations. I always enjoyed that as a kid too. Two Christmas. I mean, as an adult, it became a little bit more cumbersome. I would come into town and it was like, okay, I got to make time for this person and this person and this. And, it became a lot of uh, just expectations,
Hmm.
people always wanting your time, which is great that people want to spend time with you, but it always felt a little bit heavier as an adult in deciding like where to go when and that kind of stuff. But as a kid, you're absolutely right. It felt like winning the lottery in some ways
Yeah.
because you got two of everything. So that was definitely a plus at that time. I think the other thing I've caught myself saying a lot today, if you find yourself in this situation going through divorce, but even if you're not, maybe your kid's best friend, their parents
Mm.
are going through a divorce. I think again, just kind of having that knowledge because I know my son has definitely had friends whose parents divorced, and he'll ask me, "Well, are you and dad going to get divorced?" And
Mm-hmm.
like just having the language to use to them of, again, no, that's not in our immediate, that's not where we're at. I never want to say never because you never know. I mean,
Right.
say never, right?
Mm-hmm.
As you do, you set yourself up for for failure. But I think that just again, going back to sticking to the facts of what you might know about their friend or what they're telling you their friend is saying, and just trying to say those same things like, well, what's going to change for them? What's going
Mhm.
to be the same for them? You know,
Yeah.
so that they also have that same sort of language of how to process feelings and emotions. Because it's part of society. It's part of what kids are going to deal with it one way or the other, whether it's personally or through a friend.
Mhm.
Like I said, we had quite the network of friends when we were kids. It was like everybody's divorced. Like it was the
I
80s.
know.
Shit was just going wild in West Virginia.
It
Um,
was.
at least for
Yeah.
us, it seemed like it. I mean, I can think of very few friends, good friends off the top of my head, whose parents are still married.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so
don't know that I can. And Cameron was the first one out of his friend group to have his parents get divorced.
yeah.
So that
Whereas
was fun.
I look at like Jeff's friends that, from college and high school, and like all of their parents are still married. And I think
Wow.
that's so beautiful. Like
Mhm.
to have 40th, my aunts and uncles are still married. My grandparents, celebrated 50 years together. That is like my goal, obviously. That's what I strive
Mhm.
for. I look and model a lot of our relationship after my in-laws or after my aunt and uncles
Mhm.
on my mom's side. They have great marriages, at least again from my perception, but that's what I want. I want that for my kids because it can be so beautiful, but it's okay to acknowledge when it's not beautiful and
Yeah.
when you're not happy. And and that's okay too.
Because then beauty has an opportunity, I
That's
think, to
right.
come back into play. And that's where I would just, again, be very encouraging and validating and just, it's like that, just keep swimming. Like if you know
Mm-hmm.
that this is what you want to do, you can't just stop. You have to just kind of continue making sure that you're swimming your path and that you're doing the right things. Because again, there's the only thing I would ever change comes back to that tattoo. I would not change. I wouldn't
But
change
you are
probably.
trying to change, right? Are you still
I'm
going
trying to
through
get
the
that thing
removal?
removed. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't wait to
But
see.
so bad. But I feel confident in that. And I'm happy about that. And I think that that even provides another level of security, again, for maybe even both our kids. And so, um, yeah, but it was a time, right?
It
But
was a
you
time.
have to give yourself that time in order to give yourself the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So,
To grieve that. There ain't no shame
no
in the
shame.
grieving process. And it takes everybody different amounts of time. It might take somebody a month, it might take somebody a year, it might take somebody 5 years. I mean, it takes time and you've
Mm-hmm.
got to take care of yourself. If we say one thing every single episode as women, as moms, we have got to take care of ourselves. And there's no shame in putting yourself first.
No.
Yes, we love our kids. Yes, we love our people, but you have to love yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
that relationship might be the most important one that we have here on earth is our relationship with ourselves.
Oh yeah. Yeah. All other health and layers come from that. And so, I knew I wasn't healthy living what I was doing
Yeah.
on multiple levels. And now there's that opportunity for it to be the case. And again, the things that he's been given from this have just, I would never have imagined I don't even think that we could quantify or describe the benefits that have come from all of it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's been we're very pleased, I think, with the overall outcome.
There is a happy ending after all.
Mm-hmm. There's
Believe it or not.
that.
All right. Well, if you're still listening, thanks for sticking with us through the big D. Next
Mm-hmm.
week, we will do our best to bring a more uplifting topic, maybe. I don't know. We actually haven't even decided what next week's topic is, but thank you for listening. Of course, you can catch us on our social media at the LYLAS Podcast. You can go to our website, lylaspodcast.com. And we always love your feedback. It seriously brings so much joy to our hearts and just gives us that green light that we need to keep going and keep signing on here every week and doing this because our goal is to help one person and
Mm-hmm.
just the feedback alone, we've already succeeded at that.
Yeah.
We've already reached that goal. So thank you so much to everybody that's listening. Um, we'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you next week. Lila's out.